Hey y'all, I'm Lauren and welcome to Cantina Cast. Today I'm covering the next chunk of issues from the Yoda comic. I've been going through and covering the comics, trying to plan my coverage of comics based on the story arcs, kind of like doing like 2 to 4 issues at a time, just depending on how the story's going. And so with the Yoda comic, I previously released a video of issues 1 through 3. And today, this video is going to be covering issues 4 through 6. And issue 4 is starting a new story arc. So, with the past story arc in this comic, we were covering Yoda visiting a certain group of people, and then now in this story arc, we're covering sort of like a different part of Yoda's life. If you haven't read any of this comic yet, this video is going to be full of spoilers since I'm starting kind of in the middle of the story with this. So I recommend if you're new to this comic, check out my previous video over issues 1 through 3, which I'll link in the description below. And in addition to this being a new story arc, this next chunk of issues, it is also written by a different writer. So the last 3 issues were written by Kevin Scott, and these 3 are written by Jody Houser. And just some brief background about this comic, just as a reminder since last time. The way that it's structured is he's on Dagobah and he's reflecting back on different parts of his life. And I feel like this setup has worked really well, at least so far, because it's giving us parts of Yoda's story that show us why this character is the way he is. It's answering some questions about this character for me and going into some detail that I'm glad that I have, but it's not going into too much detail. And what I mean by that is, of course, with Yoda, it's kind of like an unspoken rule that a lot of us like it, that his background is kind of a mystery. At least I like it. I like it that there's like a lot of unknowns to him. We don't really know where he comes from. We don't know much about his people. I like all of that. And this is something that I know I was concerned about when this comic was first announced. I was like, I don't want to know too much details about this character. I would like the mystery to remain, but it's not giving away, as I've been reading it, it's kind of proving me wrong. Like, it's not giving away so much of his character that it feels like that rule is being broken, if that makes sense. So even if you were skeptical about it for that reason, I still definitely recommend giving this comic a try, because I know that like there's some questions that people have had about this character, especially in recent years. Like if you've been following High Republic, like one question that I've had about Yoda is there's some, one could argue, like some mistakes that he makes in the High Republic. If you've been following High Republic, you probably know what I'm talking about. And it's kind of like how, like, people sometimes have trouble reconciling, like, the mystical figure that we have in the original trilogy compared to the Yoda of the prequels, who goes about things quite differently, and then also compared with High Republic Yoda. Like, he kind of changes depending on different eras of his life. Which I guess that's not really like too crazy. I mean, of course, if you live for 800 years, you're probably going to transform a few times in your life and change and make some mistakes and learn some lessons and all of that. But I am glad that we are getting a little bit more about this character and maybe starting to see like why he does certain things that he does, and also like how he got to that point, what he learned from those things. I don't know. Some of those things that I'm mentioning are like pretty big concepts that we may or may not get in this comic, but I guess what I'm getting at is I like it that we're having a little bit of material like just focused on this character alone and his life story to kind of at least start like scratching the surface of some of those things. So I definitely recommend getting into the series if you haven't yet. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start talking about each individual issue. Starting with issue 4, which is called Old Friends. In this issue, we once again open up with Yoda on Dagobah, and there's someone speaking to him, and we don't see who this person is. We just kind of hear like a disembodied voice talking to Yoda while he's on Dagobah. And he's not really engaging with the voice, but you can see that the voice is talking to him, trying to get his attention. We also, at this point, don't really have any clues as to who this voice could be. I suspect it's probably a former student based on this issue, but At this point in the story, it has not been revealed to us yet. But instead of responding to the voice, Yoda starts having a flashback back on his days on Coruscant as part of the Jedi Council, and this part of his life story does take place during the prequel era. The story opens with Master Dooku coming and meeting with Yoda because Yoda has requested to see him. And this issue, it does relate a lot to Dooku Jedi Lost, the audio drama. So if you've read that audio drama, a lot of the stuff that's discussed in this comic is going to sound familiar to you, and sort of like Dooku's attitude that we see in this comic, it is something that you will already be familiar with if you've been following this character. So it's kind of cool how we have a little bit of like an intersection in this issue. But Yoda has invited Dooku because he wants him to help train some of the initiates. He wants to kind of get his thoughts on some of them and just kind of include him in that process. And Dooku he shares with Yoda, like, well, I've been doing a lot of work for the council lately. Haven't really been around much. And Yoda's like, yeah, that's the reason that I want you to help me out with these initiates. We need to listen to the Force. Like, don't just get so wrapped up in your duties to the council. And so Dooku comes with Yoda to teach the initiates. They even do like a lightsaber demonstration for them. And of course, they all go crazy for that, as anybody would. And Dooku makes quite an impression on them. But there is a initiate named Krish, who is a Wookiee, and he, shortly after this demonstration, when Dooku starts helping the initiates, he has a vision during meditation. We don't know much of the specifics of the vision yet, but you can see that it's Wookiees versus Trandoshans, and they're fighting. And at this point, we've got pretty much no context as to what this vision could mean, other than the vision is very upsetting to Krish. Being a Wookiee, of course, Wookiees versus Trandoshans, that's a long-standing issue in the Star Wars universe. So it's hard to know, just based on this vision alone, what exactly that context would be. But one of the Trandoshans in the vision does have a lightsaber, and one of Krish's classmates is a Trandoshan. So there is, I had a little bit of a concern when I was reading that part about who that Trandoshan with the lightsaber could be. But shortly after Krish has that vision, Dooku runs into them in the library, and Krish is distraught, very emotional. The vision has really left an impact. And so Dooku asks Krish, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. And Krish tells Dooku about the vision. And based on Dooku's past experience with his childhood friend Sifo-Dyas, he advises Krish about this vision in a way that other Jedi would not necessarily do. And this is something that it is briefly mentioned in conversation between Yoda and Dooku in this issue, when Yoda brings up Sifo-Dyas, and Dooku kind of is asking about, is there anything else we can do for him? And the reason for that is because Sifo-Dyas is very much tormented by visions of the future. And this is something that Dooku Jedi Lost goes into a lot more, which is that Sifo-Dyas really has great difficulty dealing with his visions, because he sees things, he has prophecies that are very disturbing and really, really difficult to deal with. It's something that has really been hard on Dooku to watch him go through that, and to also watch the Jedi Council not really support Sifo-Dyas or really believe his visions, and not really take them seriously. And so when Krish tells Dooku about the vision, Dooku tells Krish, I would recommend not telling anybody about this, because they're really not going to support you, because he saw them not support Sifo-Dyas in the same way. And so Dooku telling Krish, don't tell anybody about this, not even Master Yoda, that's kind of where we end issue 4. And this last line about not even Master Yoda, that's kind of what got me to thinking about, maybe this series is going to get into some of, the mistakes that Yoda made, because the fact that Dooku feels that Yoda is not a safe person for Krish to take this vision to, despite the fact that Yoda is Krish's teacher at this point, that is significant. And it's understandable why Dooku feels that way, is because Yoda didn't give Sifo-Dyas the support and help that he needed to deal with those visions, and there were consequences for that. So that's something that I'm interested to get deeper into as this series goes on. Then when we pick back up with issue 5, which is called Growing Shadows, we learn a little bit more about the Trandoshan initiate from issue 4. Her name is Gear, and she was found as a baby by actually a group of Wookiees because she was apparently, even as a baby, she was part of a hunting party. Like, I guess it must have been her parents were in the hunting party and they ended up getting killed tragically. And so a group of Wookiees found her and she was the only survivor, and they contacted Yoda, and Yoda brought her to the temple to learn the ways of the Force because she was Force sensitive as a baby. And so she grew up in the Jedi Temple, not having any part in the warfare between Wookiees and Trandoshans. And they are having problems as they get older because since Kershish had this vision of Gear, and the others don't know why Kershish like hates Gear now, it's like there's tension between them. Kershish, he sometimes lashes out at her, and nobody understands why. Like, he just seems like he's being rude. And Yoda assumes that the reason for this is because of the long-standing hatred between the Wookiees and the Trandoshans culturally. And so Yoda has a talk with Kershish and is like, the hatred of Trandoshans like has no place here. Gear doesn't feel that way about you, so like you need to like get a handle on this. And Yoda has no idea the truth of why he's acting like this. And in this issue, when Kershish has the vision again, to me, it's more obvious in this vision that the Trandoshan holding the lightsaber is actually Gear. So he's like pretty certain that this vision that he has does relate to Gear specifically, and that's why he kind of doesn't know like how to act toward her. And after Yoda has this talk with him, you can tell that he feels guilty, but he still doesn't know what to do about it because like he still has nightmares about the vision, and it's staying with him regardless of Yoda telling him to get it under control. And Kershish does eventually take this to Dooku again and explains that he's having the vision again, and Dooku's like, okay, well, the fact that you've had it more than once and it stayed with you for this long, to me that seems like the Force is trying to warn you about something, so you should listen to that. At this point, the theory about the meaning of the vision is that it sounds like Kershish and Dooku, they think that this vision could mean that Gear is eventually going to turn to the dark side and attack Kershish based on that. But of course, with an out of context vision, like we don't have any way of knowing that for sure. That's just kind of like their impression that they're getting so far. But Kershish does take this to heart, and the next time that he is on a mission with a group of Jedi Padawans, Yoda at one point goes off alone to meditate, and some of the Padawans are left behind talking amongst themselves. And Kershish asks Gear if he can talk to her privately. And when they go off to speak, you know, we're thinking that Kershish is going to like confront her about the vision and stuff. But while he does do that, and Gear's like, oh, I didn't know you had visions, he also like attacks her physically. Like he pushes her like head up against a tree, and then Gear tries to defend herself, and then Kershish takes his lightsaber out, and then that's the end of issue 5. Then issue 6, which is called The Greatest Teacher, starts with Yoda finding the fight going on and having to break it up. And when Yoda stops Kershish and is like, what's going on here, and Kershish admits to Yoda that he sensed the dark side, and he saw the vision of Gear turning to the dark side and said that he could sense it. I love Yoda's response here. I just feel like this is like so good. The way that he's talking to Kershish is he's like, okay, you sense the dark side in her. Well, do you sense it in me? And Kershish is like no, like he kind of doesn't know what to say. And Yoda's like, well, the dark side is in everybody. It's in the Force. It's everywhere. And our task as Jedi is to not fall to it, like to not fall victim to it. But the temptation is always going to be there, and it's never going to go away. It's like an active process of resisting it that it takes your whole life. It's something that you always have to do. And so I just loved that exchange between the two of them, because that's just a really, really like good aspect, like a good way of looking at the dark side and the light side, that I'm glad that Yoda explained that in this way. I thought that was really nicely done. And Yoda continues to talk to him and is like, okay, so in your vision you saw her turn. Do you know when this is going to happen? And he's like, no. And he's like, okay, well, do you know why? Like, he's kind of like just questioning like the details of the vision. And ultimately, like, the conclusion that's reached is that, okay, you can't rely on this vision. And even though, like, it's easy to say that the way that Master Sifo-Dyas was treated, like, in comparison to this particular issue, like, that wasn't handled well either, but also I kind of understand in this part why Yoda is saying we can't base everything off of visions because we don't have any details about it. We don't know if it's going to happen, like we don't know what it even means. So, like, I kind of get like both sides of the perspective after hearing Yoda explain this. And shortly after this, we do see a conversation between Yoda and Dooku where Dooku is explaining to Yoda that he knew about the visions as well. And Yoda was like, well, I wish that, you know, y'all would have brought this to me. And Dooku's like, well, I mean, there's been times that this hasn't been handled well by the council. So Dooku does kind of like make his concerns about this known to Yoda in a respectful way. Like, he doesn't say like his true feelings like all the way, but he does kind of hint at like, this is something that I have concerns about. But Dooku is still of the opinion that, well, maybe Kershish was warned about something in those visions and that he needed to try to stop. But sadly, Yoda's kind of like hesitance to take Force visions seriously, it is kind of reinforced in this issue because the way that this issue ends is that Gear actually does approach Yoda and she tells him that she no longer wants to be in the Jedi Temple because she is afraid of Kershish's vision coming true. And so she decides to stop her training and leave the temple. And this is an example of where Yoda really feels like he failed her because he believes that this should not have been something that caused her to end her training. He felt more like the vision is not something that needs to have this much weight put into it. And because of that, like, because Kershish acted on the vision and kind of like, it's kind of like he rang the alarm bell that he couldn't unring by saying that she was going to fall to the dark side. And after that, she kind of just couldn't let it go. Like, she was afraid that he was right and that it would happen. And she felt like she was protecting everybody by just not being a Jedi anymore. And that failure is something that has really stayed with Yoda. And this particular issue of the comic, I did really like because not only does it kind of get into some of the philosophy about light side versus dark side, but it also gets into like, should we trust Force visions? How much should we trust them? Like, how seriously should we take them? And I think that's a really interesting question to explore because I kind of can see both sides right now. It's almost like maybe the issue, like maybe the answer needs to be somewhere in the middle. Like, maybe we should take them more seriously, kind of like what Dooku is saying, but not so seriously that it's causing people to make decisions that can't ever be taken back. And another thing too is like, I almost wonder if the prophecy that Kershish was seeing, like, I almost wonder if it was kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, like he made it happen because he was so concerned about it happening. And so maybe that vision was just what he witnessed when the two of them were fighting each other. Like, maybe that's all the vision meant. Like, we don't really know for sure at this point in the story. And so I think that this is just like an interesting thing to consider. Like, what, like, are Force visions actually, like, should they really be taken as seriously as Dooku wants? Or should they be ignored as much as Yoda wants? So I'm glad that this comic kind of got into a couple of those issues. Like, not only are we learning more about as these issues relate to Yoda specifically, but we're also kind of thinking more about like how these issues relate to the Jedi more as a whole. And I am going to keep covering the series as well, so I have another video coming up where I'm going to be covering the next issue, so keep an eye out for that. Let me know in the comments if you've been enjoying this series though. I know I've really liked it a lot. It has pleasantly surprised me. I kind of didn't know what to expect going into it, but I really like the direction that it's been going. And thanks so much for watching, guys, and I hope that y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye, y'all.